It is always such a beautiful feeling to celebrate today's event, and it is a great feeling, excitement for me also, because I've opened this same event in the past few years. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, everyone. We are obviously undergoing great changes, and one of the positive aspects of this event is that you're attending in large numbers. I will update you shortly with the number of people attending, close to 600 up until a few minutes ago, so people who have subscribed, and this is nice to hear. And now, speaking through celebrations, because 20 is the important number for this event, 2020, and it's been 20 years ever since Mix Internet Exchange in Milan. Many things have changed over the past 20 years. Let's consider our job, our work, the way companies have changed. Also, perhaps many of them were not even there. Well, of course, many belonging to the technology domain, of course, but also companies making use of MIT's services. Now, speaking to celebrations, I would like to remind you that 5 p.m. we'll have a toast. It will be a remote toast, but it will be an important and emotional moment of celebration. Right before, we'll hold a quiz show, 4 o'clock. Winners will get an iPad as well as Mix Awards, which is going to be an interesting event within the event. Salotto from Mix is just one of these day for celebrations. We'll also be exchanging lots of information. You may also download an app, Android or iOS, that allows you to meet people remotely, virtually, and exchange messages and credentials, of course. And as it is in all the event in person, right after the meeting, it was beautiful to network, to say hi to people that we hadn't met for a while. And Zcard is the name of this application that I was introducing, as well as App Mix Salotto, which allows us to do this in a virtual manner. Welcome to Joy Marino, the president of Mix. Joy, I leave the floor to you now to open works for very short introduction. Hi. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Hi, Enrico. Well, can I update you? It is now 570 people who have subscribed, and we'll double-check whether these 570 people are currently following us online, but I would assume this is the case, that people are following the event, and this is one of the positive aspects of what we're currently experiencing, which is not that positive, right? I mean, this has been a painful period of time. We're remote, we're distant apart, but we could not expect having that large number of people all in the same room, right? Yes, thank you. Apologies for my poor connection. I'd love to take 1 minute and I'd love to welcome you all to this Salotto event, which is, of course, a special day, considering what happened recently. I'd love to thank all people who have contributed to make this event possible and for sharing such great support. I'd love to thank sponsors also who have trusted the importance of this event, and special thanks to Vice President Alex Alota. He deserves the credit for having organized the panel this morning, and also Valeria, who has been so good in organizing the afternoon events. I woke up this morning and an African proverb came to mind, and then I was reading my newspaper this morning, and Lassini, he wrote an article. He's an agronomist, and over the last 10 years, he has started some special events in planting trees. So the best moment for planting a tree is 20 years ago. The second best moment is now. And for us, from Mix, it should have been a year for celebration, for meeting up, because we are indeed celebrating our 20th anniversary. We started in January, and we all know what happened right after. So I'd like to share a very quick impression as a plumber of networks, and this is stolen by somebody, it's not mine. So as a plumber, it's been interesting to see flows and channels where internet is flowing. They've raised, but also they've raised in their level, and they've also started to flow backwards. And internet, just like a tree, has done whatever it could to cope with an increase in traffic by 50% overnight. And we could have made it with an even bigger increase. And now time has come to plant additional trees for a different Italy, for an Italy that has to be aware of how important internet is. It is always, even when the pandemic is over. Have a productive day, you all. Joy, we don't have a round of applause that, of course, right now we could have had, because this is only a virtual meeting. But please, being online with us for a moment before you turn connection off, as I'd love to grab another impression from you. And I'd love to mention the speakers who will be panelists in the next 1.5 hours. So we've been super on time. We started 11 sharp, and this third part of the event will close at 12:45. In the afternoon, you will hold a keynote, and then, of course, there will be awards. There'll be a final toast at 5 p.m. I'd love to anticipate, though, those speakers, those panelists will contribute to discussion. Franco, Bassanini, I won't mention the roles because, well, many of you are very well known to all of you, but I deep dive into details. And then Vincenza, Bruno, Bossio, along with deputies Alessandro, Morelli and Luca Carabetta. Lisa Difeliciantonio from Fastweb, Marco, Guy, Anitec-Assinform, Quintarelli, Luca, Spada, and Alessandro, Talotta, whom you have just mentioned. We will be online with us. We'll be connected with all of them. And one thing that I'd love to anticipate, something that you might be already used to, so you have to keep your microphone on mute until I call out your name. Webcam has to be on the whole time. So, Joy, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary. So, where were you 20 years ago? Well, this is a TV studio today. Well, not far away from Mix, by the way. We're in Milan. We're obviously using Mix infrastructures. But you were perhaps in Mix already, right? Perhaps not the same premise. Well, yes, the venue of Mix has been the same for 20 years. It hasn't changed. Actually, the headquarters has been symbolically taking now end of 89 time. It was time for us to grab that opportunity, and we didn't allow that to happen. I've been president myself for 20 years, and many times I did say how things went. And January this year, I could not imagine that I would be here after 20 years. Well, for sure, not experiencing this very unique scenario, because this is obviously original, so to speak, in inverted commas. Joy, thank you so much for your work and efforts, and thank you for the words that you have used to share your opening, the opening of this event. Have a productive day, you all. Thank you. So, I'd love to introduce the guests now. I will call them by their name. They're all remote connected with us, and shortly we'll be hearing from them. I'd love to remind you also, and I'd like to remind you also, because perhaps you were not online 10 minutes ago. So mix a Salotto app or the Zoacad platform allow you to download what's going on here, to see the guests, to hear the guests, as well as exchange messages or considerations or questions. So if you, because we will obviously have a Q&A session at the very end, and it will be my task either to censor or to collect your insight. Alessandro Talotta, Vice President, Milano Internet Exchange. So we're testing connection also, right? Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Well, I'd love to deep dive into discussion for this morning, starting from mix, starting from local perspective and broadening up to a much wider perspective, nationwide, but also Europe-wide, and also including the overall scenario for telco. So a lot has been said in the past few months around the importance of the net, of the internet. And we can say that obviously internet was holding on right, although experiencing some painful moments. And that has happened thanks to internet exchange and thanks to mix, which appears to be the most important one from a European standpoint. So if it's true, like people say, that internet has become almost a kind of a commodity, and some people don't even accept the almost. So obviously, internet appears to be has the one thing that has to be recognized more in the upcoming years. So let's broaden up the vision then, the perspective. I leave the floor to you. Well, of course, it is not that we wake up this morning and understand that mix is important as an internet exchange platform. We've known that for some time, of course, but yes, it's very true that we've provided an important infrastructure over the last few months, and it is important to understand more about it, as this is part of the overall accurate functioning of internet. So interconnection, inter-exchange platforms, it means that all networks can dialogue, can interact with one another any moment, and with no limits and with no rules. Rules are those being defined by data accurate exchange of data. So internet had to cope with a very dramatic scenario from a human viewpoint, but truly interesting if we consider the resilience that we have built in 20 years in our country. Let's not forget that we often watch advertisement, we buy the latest smartphone, but behind this, there's huge efforts from technicians, engineers to allow the net to work. They've invested greatly on it, everybody. I'd love to thank all the industry operators who have worked tireless, making the effort to ensure that service that was crucial, because isolation, the lockdown that is being imposed by government to get rid, or at least to refrain COVID to hit, well, that implied the need to still be productive in our economic system. For us to be productive, we have to be connected to one another, and we have to contribute, and the network has helped. Mix is then is then presenting and it's then showing that accurate functioning is taking place so that all operators from the industry can find the right door to allow customers and clients to speak to one another and also download all the possible information available. And that has to happen free of charge. That has to be the most democratic activity ever. Thank you. Franco Bassanini, President from Open Fiber. Good morning. Good morning to you.
Open
Fiber has become in few years a crucial player when it comes to modernize the NAC in the country. It is a player that started off in a very neutral manner, and I must say I've learned a lot in the past few years, and I was really surprised that Open Fiber is not member of Mix, is not part of Mix in Milan. What's the reason for that? Can you tell us more about it? Because you are a native neutral and Mix is also so native neutral. Because of this happy correlation, why you're not part of Mix yet? I think you will have to unmute the microphone, Mr. Bassanini. We should be able to hear you now. Well, allow me to say that almost, we should get rid of that almost, as Talotta said, that the right to internet, it is a universal man's right. Stefano Rodotà had considered that internet would become part of the constitution, of the Italian constitution, and there's a constitutional law with the signee Mariana Madia who wants to add that into the constitution. In absence of internet, and you all know what we're talking about because of the lockdown we've just experienced, where it is fairly impossible to survive, or let's say that the potential for development of people are limited. So let's get rid of almost. Now, Open Fiber will soon celebrate its 4th year since its birthday. And it is a brand new entry into this scenario. So why are we not member of Mix yet? Well, for a simple reason, and that is about to expire really, and that is that when Open Fiber was started, its customers were mainly relying upon the passive infrastructures. See, it was really them who had let's say, who were interested in being part of Mix family, so to speak. Whereas now, we are developing traffic of our virtual operators, of our customers on our platforms. And I'd love to mention perhaps Sorgenia and Poste Italiane, our key accounts, really. So perhaps I think it will be just a matter of few weeks, and then what I expect really is that we will be perhaps becoming part of the Mix system also. We haven't debated yet whether there's a possibility to perhaps buy a share of it, becoming because the transfer of the surplus from Iridios could be a good opportunity, but time was not ready yet. But if that happens again, we will surely be more than interested. Well, we will be tackling these topics soon, but I'd love to take advantage of two important operators, Eolo and Fastweb, for a quick mention around potential development in terms of valorizing the importance of Mix. So Spada first, and then Lisa Difeliciantonio. And then we will open the debate on other topics. Luca from Eolo. Uh, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Enrico, can you hear me? Yes, we hear you okay. It has been said already by Alessandro, the great importance, the crucial importance with mix is something that we realized even further when starting from March 8, overnight traffic was almost as a doubled, literally in 24 hours. And thanks to the resilience that internet has been pursued starting from the 80s, well, we've been able to actually hold on, and things did work great from day one. I have to say that COVID, amongst disasters, has also killed Moore's Law. The traffic would double every 18 months, whereas as an operator, I can tell you now that the traffic has doubled in 9 months from an average traffic per customer equal to 120 giga, we're over 250 gigabytes per month per customer. And that skyrocketing growth has obviously been depended upon streaming, video call, a change in habits of Italian citizens, which will be there forever now. And that was made possible because internet exchange is very much the key aspect, the network's aggregator that allows to have a scalability of performances and first and foremost a neutral access from any operator to the network. And thanks to these network sharings. So that is where the value sits, and this will be increasingly important, and this is something that we experienced with COVID. The access has to remain neutral, open to all operators, so that we may exchange traffic irrespective of bandwidth or irrespective of constraints or binding restrictions imposed by some government. So that has to be broad, predetermined and free. Well, very rapidly, I'd like to hear from Lisa Difeliciantonio. She's the head of media relations and public affairs in Fastweb. Fastweb, by the way, also attends and participates even more than other players to the life of experts of network. I'd love to mention an example to make this clear. The manifesto of MIX often mentions the importance of cybersecurity or the threats of cyber insecurity, and actually Fastweb shares with Clusit all data relative to attacks, and hopefully this is also the case from other operators. So, Lisa, I'd love to hear about what MIX operator the system can do to valorize these resources. Well, good morning, and thanks so much for inviting me today. Well, speakers before me have said it already. MIX has been crucial in the past few years in preserving the transparent and free democratic nature of Internet. And and it has been said, of course, that during the pandemic, the role of MIX has increased, has become stronger, more powerful. But I'd love to remind you all that the strength and the power of Internet is not to be controlled by anybody. Any content can reach out to any user, irrespective or although the many attempts that have been made in the past year to control, manage and really change this status quo. I have to say that MIX is a crucial portion of that. Some of you mentioned a metaphor in flow, mentioning flows, but that's very true. Internet is a place for freedom where any attempt made by anybody to control step in, changing rules of the game, will be useless. But many attempts have been made, and let's not take it for granted that internet can actually stay the same. I'd love to remind you the battle of net neutrality happening in 2015 and 16. That has been a very great one. But generally, many attempts have been made to change the nature of peering and the relationships amongst the internet. So best wishes to Mix for celebrating its 20th anniversary. We'll be part of this system because we do really trust this organism.
Politics and the political system is important for this development. So Vincenza Bruno Bossio, MP of PD and Transport and Communication Commissioner of the lower chamber, welcome. One question, and then if you want to elaborate on this importance and the balance we need between the market and regulation. You know, it's always complicated. But I have a question for you, in general, about topics relating to the internet. I mean, this is my question. This could be a statement, not a question. Don't you think that they are disregarded by the general political agenda? I mean, sure, some topics may appear to be complex, but at the end of the day, I have in my hands a tablet or a smartphone, a device or a PC, and you name it, and all that's behind heavily impacts my daily life and the use of services. Good morning and welcome, Vincenza Bruno Bossi. We cannot hear you. Okay, we can hear you. Good morning. I was unable to use the Wi-Fi. We'll see if that's doable shortly. So I'm connected using my telco operator, which shows that all in all, the mobile network kind of works. First of all, happy anniversary, happy birthday, Mix, and thank you for your role in these years and that you will continue to perform. So, you said that the internet is disregarded. Well, that's one of the issues we've had to come to grips with. We MPs very much love this topic. So, Stefano Quintarelli, hello, and thank you, because in the previous administration, you launched innovation intergroup. It was an attempt, and it has survived in this administration as well, because you focused on the internet and the digital, and also the history of the commission led by Rodota was initiated by Ms. Boldrini as a president of the lower chamber, and today I'm one of the signatories of the bill of law proposed by Ms. Madia, so that right to access is a constitutional right. And then there is a constitutional or non-constitutional discussion on that. I mean, what really matters is that at last we put at the center the fact that all citizens have a right to connect, and the state somehow has to support this right. I must say that unfortunately the pandemic has brutally put us in front of this need, and it is not by chance that the recovery plan focuses on the digital, green and sustainability as one of the fundamental building blocks. So all of the countries, Italy included, have had to adapt, luckily so. I must say that we are not doing that bad, because here as well in the previous administration, we've continued to focus on the digital. And as a matter of fact, in the market and in the open fiber bids, aside from the discussion that I've had with Professor Bassanini, we've seen that this has kind of pushed all of the players to invest in fiber and connectivity. so that it could be as widespread as possible. As compared to European indicators, when it comes to 5G infrastructures, we as a country have had the best results. Instead, we're still laggards, and I'm seeing Marco Guy, with whom we've battled together, and hopefully this is going to be the case as well in the future. We've had to, refocus on digital competencies, but there still is a fundamental digital divide in Italy, unfortunately. Going back to the network, I believe that today we can really do that important work that started in the previous years and that we can continue to carry on. In this budget law, we have an amendment that the Five-Star Movement, the Democratic Party, and the League and the Brothers of Italy have supported the digital bonus to, improve the situation in city centres and large cities, because the digital divide is so bad, too bad. And this is due to the fact that FTTH cannot reach out to the homes. We don't even have the cabinets for a faster connection. So it's a long way to go. And to answer your question, what I can tell you is that yes, we've been laggards of the last years with the digital. Many of us in the front line have had to, go crazy for this. But we have a feeling that things are changing, even though, the red tape and funds are not always working that well, and announcements are not always accompanied by initiatives that really push in this direction. We've submitted an amendment for funding the Institute on Artificial Intelligence. There's a fund for innovation as well. So we have lots of things that we still have to accommodate in the system. Hopefully, now that we have, a control room for the recovery fund, and this can finally push the execution, most especially, because this is what we're not having to unlock opportunities so that Italy really becomes the digital country that we haven't seen so far. Thank you. So you've heard that the connection was not really ideal and the sound was really bad. We will have to improve it. So now move on. Let's move on to Luca Carabetta, five-star member of parliament. So we've talked about the so-called recovery fund. This is not the real name, but it's an instrument that is certainly important, and this is certainly one of the elements we're going to talk about in a moment. But Carabella, in general, what do you think we can do more or less times? Because the role of politics is also to understand that maybe at times it's not necessary to set a foothold in an arena, but you have to let the market move its own way. Good morning and welcome. Good morning and thank you. Thank you for having me. Hopefully the sound is okay. Like my colleague Bruno Bossio, in the same venue. We are using the 4G connection, so maybe there are connection problems because, it's quite complex, this structure. So first thing first, to the point of my colleague, I'd like to thank Quintarelli, the former colleague, but we are still in touch, Stefano Quintarelli. He said one thing that is so valuable, i.e. the intergroup for innovation and digitalization are so important. And the beauty of a parliamentary intergroup is that parliamentary members of different groups brainstorm and win common battles. So I'd like to say that tech innovation and digitalization have never been a battleground, rather a ground for constructive proposals. And I'd like to thank for this all of the majority and minority parties of these two administrations, because we know that something has changed. But, aside from the many political issues we've had, I must avow that there is a full continuity on many topics connected to technological innovation and the net in particular. As regards to the recovery fund slash plan, first of all, I'd like to say that the best word to use right now is resilience. We've been disrupted by COVID. You said some figures about that. Many industries have been harsh hit, some benefited, but in most cases, unfortunately, there have been huge problems to tackle. It's too soon to say what's going to become structural, but it's clear that COVID is going to be, a transition. So the post-COVID scenario is not going to be the same as before COVID. The country is going to be resilient, and politicians have to kind of anticipate trends and the structural themes, and politicians should provide citizens and businesses all of the right tools. Maybe we won't have online events only in the future, but we will certainly implement this, and e-learning and online meetings are going to be part and parcel of our daily life. So in any case, there's going to be an increase compared to pre-COVID levels. So it's going to be necessary to develop enablers like network access, and this is fundamental. On this front, we've had an acceleration. Specific actions have been taken for the public administration and schools. Remember that, unfortunately, we've been laggards in terms of school access to the networks. And, we're going through an emergency stage right now. But now it's up to us to rebuild all of this. We have to move from the emergency to a structural scenario. So access to digital services is fundamental for schools and citizens and the public administration. These are the priorities of the Recovery Fund. Now then, as you know, we should talk about the Next Generation EU plan, which is broader. Negotiations are underway, and personally I hope that these will go above and beyond this, and the ministries will have to set up plans. We already have guidelines that have been approved based upon the various contributions of various MP groups, and then the ministries will put up projects, and hopefully this will also listen to the stakeholders, trade associations and those who live every day the reality of things. In this sense, MPs have a role. I mean, not just scribblers, but they have to listen. And this is the most important thing for politicians. If you want to propose solutions and solve problems, you have to listen. The main difficulty that I'm seeing, and with that I'll close, is not so much to propose plans and advanced solutions in terms of far-flung and distributed network access, but there is a governance problem, because tech innovation in general is cross-cutting for governments and ministries, and most especially at the different institutional levels, the central government, the regional government, the local government, and the local authorities. And I believe that it is our duty to think of this, because otherwise we'll be at the end of the recovery stage with many projects put together but no common vision. This is a criticality, and we are moving so that there is, a control room that provides structural, long-term responses, not short-lived, overlapping, or disconnected projects. This is what I hope. We are making best efforts, and, the majority parties and the minority parties. It's not a battleground. We want to act in the best interests of the country every day. Thank you. prior to giving the floor to Stefano Quintarelli, who has already been thanked and mentioned several times. Now, Alessandro Morelli, MP of the League, so TLC and Transport Commission. Morelli, what's your take on what's been said here up until now, and also tell us what you think about this homogeneity of, not of views, I would say, but I mean this good relationship between the MPs who deal with technology and innovation in their own province. On many topics, there are not many avenues. On many topics, there's, one or just a handful of avenues. Welcome. Thank you. Morelli. Thank you and happy birthday. It's a special birthday, a special celebration. No one would have ever expected this, but maybe it's perfect for a mix. Because thanks to the contributions of all, we can have this type of connection. So thank you and happy birthday. Yes, you're perfectly right. I agree 100% on what has been said by the previous speakers, because right, like you said, on these topics, there's no one flag. We have a common goal. And as a result, it can only be shared and agreed to by all political parties. Having said that, however, there are several ways of achieving results. You mentioned the control room. Sure. However, it shouldn't be the exception that confirms the rule. If the rule is that we're sharing as much as possible, a useful strategy to achieve the goals that relate to greater digitalization of the country, this could be the exception, because for now, unfortunately, there's been no full sharing of goals and strategies, and so this could be an issue, for sure. But, online meetings like this one, like Carabetta said, are very important because we can listen so that we can report the goals to the relevant persons. You rightly referred to the role of politics and politicians, and I believe that politics has a duty, a task that is fundamental to avoid anarchy. The internet is free. It must be free. It will have to be free. However, politics should establish a perimeter, a boundary, so that the public interest is respected. There are many private businesses that, as should be the case, do their job, and very well as to that, and they're a great resource for the country. However, private businesses, as should be the case, are focused on their own accounts. And the task of politics is to find a balance to interconnect the private interests with the public common good and interest, showing the way to achieve the goals, which hopefully will be as agreeable to as possible. And I'd like to remind you of the fact that as regards the proposals relating to institutional change, on top of access to the internet, we've also filed one more proposal. And by the way, we talked about sharing on many topics, so we focused on the protection of the digital identity of Italian citizens, and this certainly is a step beyond, but it's fundamental because, useless to explain the reasons underlying this protection of the personal identity of citizens, most especially in this stage in which we more often than not talk about privacy and data and so on and so forth. So, having said that, hopefully online meetings like this one can be as shared as possible, not only amongst the industry players and stakeholders and politicians and political parties who, maybe are interested in these topics. But I mean, these topics should become, how shall I put it, a topic for general discussion. And unfortunately, as you may have noticed, more often than not, when we speak at conferences or meetings or webinars on these topics, as I was saying, more often than not, we end up being self-referential. Instead, the public broadcasters and RAI in Italy, they play a fundamental role. I mean, they are not technical experts, but they should broaden the spectrum of this discussion. This would be very useful because the public opinion should not see these new technologies just in terms of, the new 5Gs, the new cell phone. So I'm willing to borrow money to buy it because I will download faster a movie on my cell phone. Rather, 5G and the other main options like AI and cloud computing should be at the center of our economy in terms of all of its sectors. Thank you and happy birthday. Stefano Quintarelli, good morning and welcome. Hi, Stefano. Whenever we have him, I always have difficulties in understanding exactly how to introduce him. He's a writer, he's an MP, Maybe I'll make you laugh, and then I want to know how many of you are connected. But in some years ago, they said you are a blogger. You've been introduced as a blogger. My blog is a notepad. Okay, but based upon the previous speakers, you've done so well over the last few years, so important these years. Yes, Alberto Carnevale must say, he uses bizarre words. He would say that the innovation into loop is a cognitive billing among political parties, and that is it. A place of ideas and perspectives and things to do. So I have borrowed these good practices from him. But there are two birthdays, 20 years as a company and 25 since the first switch was switched on. Packages on a common switcher date back to 1995. Yes, this afternoon, during the celebration, we will celebrate twice. Stefano, stay with us, because I'll come back to you in a moment. Now we have Marco Gai. He's connected, so in a moment, we'll give the floor to him as well. But back to Professor Franco Bassanini. One thing I very much like of him is his vision of the system. I mean, we do need this, and badly so. So, going back to the point of security, I'd like now to broaden the picture in terms of defining security. But I mean, this theme was central in the manifesto of Salotto2020 because the security of the infrastructure means the security of the nation, in a way. So, Professor, I have a question for you, and I'd like to ask you what's your take on how to ensure the security of the Italian network in this scenario of a great willingness to restart and lots of money we should receive. We'll see in the next months how much of this money we will really receive. So, something has already been hinted at by the previous speakers, in particular the MPs. We need to have, as quickly as possible, a total coverage across Italy of the so-called very high transmission capacity networks. So, fiber and 5G, and edge cloud computing, and proximity data centers embedded within the network. It's a long way to go with respect to this. The debate often focused on the secondary aspects. The problem is not so much that of saying whether infrastructural competition is better or a single network is better. Historically, as is well known, I'm a supporter of the idea that the best solution would be, and I've been saying that over the last 30 years, so alas, quite a long time. I've been preaching, but failed. It would be better, however, to have a single large infrastructure to focus all of the investments on. And, mix is neutral, and it's not vertically integrated, so it's ideal from this point of view. And I continue to think that if at all possible, this is the best solution, because it would enable to ensure total coverage, avoiding duplication of investments. When I hear Italian ministers, I mean all of those who've dealt with this, saying that there should be a single network, that should be a third party, an independent third party, I think they're in agreement with me. When Margrethe Vestager, a great supporter of competition in the market, said, and she said that several times over the last few months, and this was a step forward for her compared to her previous opinions. She says that in some conditions it's possible to think that we move from an infrastructural competition to a single infrastructure. This is possible only if it is independent compared to service providers and if it ensures the security of all. And then there is an amendment presented for the budget law by a colleague of Morelli, and maybe he signed that Mr. Capitano is responsible for this. And so this possible maybe could be a federal one. I mean, that it is present locally, including where there are vertically integrated entities, which, however, are very important for a single national infrastructure. Up until now, this was not possible, and that is why an amendment to the law could make this possible. The Parliament took action, and significantly so, as Bruno Bossio said, and it took action to get rid of some of the main hindrances to the quick rollout of the infrastructure. I'd like to make only the case of open fiber. Open fiber is almost 4 years old, so it's fairly young. Over the last 4 years, after the initial warm-up, but that was inevitable, what has it done? Well, it has connected over 7 million households in cities, and slightly more than 2 million in market failure areas with some public funds. Why is there this difference between 7 and 2, or 2 something? Look, this difference is mostly due to procedures. In market failure areas, open fiber is a concessionaire, a licensee, subject to public rules and tender rules as expressed in the public code, and there are bureaucratic procedures that make it a long, drawn-out process. The Parliament did work over the last few months in order to, simplify all of this. I believe that something ought to be done, but a lot has been done, and hopefully we will see the results of this. I know that some amendments have been presented alongside the budget law. For example, in order to automatize the possibility of using mini or micro trenches when laying the optic fiber. I mean, these are less impactful, less expensive, quicker to lay down. And the Commission, at the proposal of Bruno Bossio, proposed to provide for some sort of digital bonus for the construction of the vertical elements inside condominiums and buildings. I believe that something similar to the digital bonus should be provided for the internal distribution of the signal in the homes and buildings, residential buildings, because more often than not, I mean, we're not in the USA where homes more often than not are made of wood or cardboard. Here we have stone, concrete. So the fact that the connection reaches, the lobby, it doesn't mean that in the children's room who do remote learning, they do have a good connection. And the same holds true for, parents if they work from home. So a digital bonus like the eco bonus or quake bonus ought to be provided for the digital connection as well. By so doing, I believe that we could incentivize a fast coverage of the whole country. This is the ultimate goal, and rightfully so, according to me. Then we'll see if, as I hope, we will meet the requirements for a single infrastructure. I believe that, and this answers directly your last question, Pagliarini, I believe that the TLC infrastructure, fiber, 5G, edge cloud computing, is so fundamental and absolutely so that it is a strategic infrastructure for the country. So the idea that it ends up in the hands of financiers of an uncertain nationality is a big concern for me. I believe that, and I'm saying so very directly, according to me 30 years ago, I mean, I was part of that government, but I didn't have any responsibility specifically for this sector. Back then, the privatization of the then STEP was wrong. Instead, like with other strategic companies like Eni, Enel, they should have maintained a guarantee stake in the capital of the company. Because we're talking about a long-term investor, and as such, these investors should defend the strategic interests of the country. There's no reason why the model of Enel and Eni, that was a successful one, shouldn't have been adopted for STETSIP as well, I mean for the telcos, considering the current results.
Thank you, Professor Bassanini. Stefano, you were speaking for only a few seconds earlier on. I'd love to collect your opinion around this same topic. I said I've learned a lot whilst speaking to individuals working within ecosystem, because I've attended Salotto from Mix. I've had contacts over the years, and I keep talking to many individuals around it. Something that is still blurred to me: how can you actually make a network completely neutral and independent? And that is where we started from. We spoke about the importance of mix being independent and neutral, and that being a key part of that, key feature. So it is still not clear to me. I'd love to understand your opinion, because this is one of the key aspects, I assume. Also, the risk, if we don't do that, the risk is that we may actually slow this down and kind of get stuck in the debate, and we do not really overcome the problem in the first place. Stefano Quintarelli. Thank you, Enrico. First of all, I'd love to go back to what Franco said a few seconds ago. I did appreciate his piece of advice, and I think it is important what he said when he tackled security. Around the one net, the fiber net, I couldn't agree more that, well, privatization of the net happened. Unfortunately, we do have problems. The speaker is frozen, so I'm taking the floor back, and let's see whether we are able to speak to Stefano. No, Stefano is frozen. It means that he's not online anymore. Marco Gai. Marco Gai. Confindustria is an important player. Marco Gai is president of Anitec-Assinform, so one of the innovative branches, if you will. You are also recommending, as per my understanding, you're also recommending a number of measures to be adopted to start again and make the use of funds as best as we can, right? Marco, welcome. I was actually not online during the first bit of your question. Perhaps you were only introducing me, right? So I hope I got the question correctly. Yeah, my question is around what are you doing within Anitec-Assinform that you're currently chairing through the roundtable that you're now attending? Because we understand that we have to be good in welcoming the recommendation and the advice from the rest of the country, same as managing directors should actually improve their listening capabilities when it comes to experts. Well, Stefano Quintarelli is back online. Marco, if you can wait, so we'll allow Quintarelli to finish. So I try to summarize. I've had a browser problem. So digital bonus makes sense, as I said, especially for low-income families. And I do agree that privatization happened because of major needs in cash flow in those years. And I can understand that better. I remember Ruggero, when he was managing director of Telecom Italia, he used to say, we're now going for fibers, and things weren't really accomplished until a few years later. And when it comes to the golden power, we're able to handle it. The problem the problem with me is the perception and the definition that we were having back then in 1990 with the infrastructure. You perhaps remember the very first directive dating 1990s and used to say about the ladder of investment being promoted by Martin Clave, and some of us were deemed that to be something that it would have never worked in the future. And some additional papers were also saying that the competition would have developed according to horizontal scales. But actually, the reference model back then, it was telephone. EDSL was not there. Internet was not there. It was a very different world back then. So yes, it was a wrong thing to do back then, but it was also difficult for people to take the best decision because the scenario was so much different. So in my view, it is now make sense to separate infrastructure from services and to consider investments in the long run. Notwithstanding, when it comes to debate around the one net, the single net, I'd love to draw a couple of conclusions. First of all, we're talking about topics that should be, let's say, deep dive into by governments and many different players, but nobody has really mentioned technical issues because that is where the evil sits. So how much centers do we need? Is it point-to-point or is it a point multi-point? So what is the look of the future net? Because if we don't do that, we are unable to also assess the money that is needed for investment purposes. And now, I don't know how this is going to unfold, but let me say that as per my observation, the boundary is very blurred because of financial reasons, which I understand. Then Telecom Italia says I have to consolidate the network. And for antitrust services, Telecom Italia says I will not consolidate the net. So we do have these two aspects. On the one side, yes, we're consolidating. On the other side, we're not consolidating. So this blurred boundary between the two, so from an antitrust viewpoint, it shall not be consolidation, but then it is a consolidation for financial purposes. I think right on that blurred boundary, we're very much making the right decision, and hopefully it will be the best decision, the right decision. I did say that the battlefield would have been Brussels. I don't think it is yet there. So there's nothing there yet that has been released. The minute the battlefield moves to Brussels for good, then I'm doubtful that the antitrust will ever accept a consolidation. And as I said, back to this blurred boundary. So from financial purposes, yes, consolidated. From an antitrust, no, it is not consolidated. So for this operation to be successful, we'll have to come up with a genius solution that will keep all these aspects together. Well, because they apparently are contradictory to one another. Yes, I often speak to Brussels people as well, and they're very doubtful, same as you say, that this operation will ever be fulfilled successfully. Marco Guy, so back to Anitec-Assinform. I'd love to understand from you what are the guidelines, if you will, the pieces of advice that you're about to submit to either government or politicians more broadly. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm happy that I can contribute to this interesting debate. I'd like to start from the following observation. When speaking through the digital market, this is a very one-of-a-kind year, and perhaps we'll report a loss by 2 to 3%. So a moderate decrease. With respect to the impact on GDP in Italy, well, that stems three considerations. On one side, it is a resilient market, and because of the cultural shock that we have experienced, and I see some of the colleagues in this panel here, well, we've been talking for years about the importance of the digital transformation, the impact that it may generate on the society, and perhaps we are realizing nowadays that the impact is indeed very much there. And it does also help countries to change and to change effectively. Prospect data we currently own say that 2021 will recover what is lost in 2020, but will even overcome the aggregate of 2019 and then it will still grow starting from then, from 2021. And this is an important aspect because that leads me to a second consideration. Nowadays, there are technologies within this framework that keep growing double digit. And these are technologies that, thanks to the development of the net as well as 5G, they will become even more important. Cloud, to mention an example, blockchain, cybersecurity, which is so dramatically important. I'm thinking about AI as well. And so these digital enablers, they're currently growing between 16 and 29%, so double-digit growth. The third observation, and then I will actually go back to your question, try to address it. Well, digital, more than ever, keeps having an impact outside ICT industry. So yes, we have to grow investments in ICT, otherwise we will not be able to compete and grow effectively. But at the same time, it is true to say that thanks to the digital transformation and thanks to the ICT industry, well, the whole country is now benefiting from this growth. And it's been 2.5 years ever since I started to work for Anitec-Assinform. And I must say that we have focused from day one to disseminate case histories in terms of the digital impact on companies, on traditional companies. Because we don't want to keep saying that the good old times were so much better. That's not true. We have to focus on what's coming next, on the future. And this is why we're very much focused on demand and supply, setting priorities. And from a demand standpoint, of course, we have to approach the thing from an individual-centric viewpoint to allow everybody to access the digital transformation. This can only work and be successful if bandwidth is ensured through 5G, for instance. Also, providing public administration with the impetus to digital transformation, signing a public-private partnership, and I hope that everybody is going to appreciate what I'm saying. So we can't expect the public administration to innovate unless they're partnering with the rest of the market. Otherwise, it will become a company itself, and perhaps in a few decades' time, then we will look back and say that we went wrong. And then another key pillar is school education. When we speak through skills and competencies or lack of that, then we have to focus on education as well. And then very simply enough, we shall focus on schools, considering what happened in 2020 with remote distance. Of course, remote learning, remote teaching was not the optimum, of course, but that is what happened. And what makes also digital key is the handling in the healthcare sector. So, of course, whenever there's impact, there's growth. Addressing your question, I'd love to say that from a supply viewpoint, we should focus more on R&D. And as of now, we're lacking some 6,500 researchers and scientists, and that is a dramatically important number that I'd love to highlight, because it means that we're not growing skills in people, we're not making those steps that will be important for knowledge transfer to take place. And when it comes to supply, again, we should go for an improved school skill set transfer, growing skills. Unless we're able to plan successfully, focusing on these skill transfers, we will always be unable to grab and seize the opportunities that we'll find ahead of us. But that is a vision that has to be pursued from day one, because when it comes to learning cycles, well, they do generate positive impact in 3 to 5 years. So I'm happy that I can still talk around the importance of skills, increasing, improving soft skills and so on. But what I really envisage for is, rather than just talking, we can translate some of that into facts. And last but not least, is innovation startups. Well, they can surely provide impetus to digital transformation. It is clearly an offer, a supply enabler, and it can allow more traditional companies to transform themselves. And all of this together brings to favoring investment. Investment from private, attracting foreign investment also, as this market can only grow if we're able to benefit from direct investment, but also, and perhaps even more, if we're able to attract foreign capitals. And then the benefit might really disseminate successfully. It is a far too important train for us to miss it, because our equivalent elsewhere in Europe are already on board, and we don't want to wait any further. I'm really convinced about the value embedded in Made in Italy, but let's avoid rhetorics. If we are fully convinced that our added value is made of our ability of making great products, well, we have to associate this added value to an execution. Otherwise, this won't make sense. Thank you, Marco. Luca, Spada. Because you are you're also attending an important roundtable in Confindustria, perhaps you can have a saying around this as well, right? Yes. Yes, I'm actually around the experts roundtable for digital development with President Vistosi. And these days, we've defined new objectives for this roundtable to actually draft some projects and initiatives to submit to the government around new ideas to allocate the funds that will become available once recovery fund is provided. We're addressing 4 different areas. On first one, we want to raise from 40 to 60% the tax rate in terms of incentivizing the implementation of Industry 4.0, and then incentivize from 12 to 25% on other topics, and also carry on the bankability of tax credit. What I'm saying is having in the invoice the discount provided by the incentives. And then co-funding, public and private, as we said, with accurate timelines, with accurate reporting, and being knowledgeable about the stakeholders, because of course the objective is to carry forward with initiatives which are clear, innovative, and accurately reported, and they must include also this public-private partnership that we mentioned already. And then the infrastructure aspect, which I don't have to deep dive into, as you all know what I'm talking about. So the ultra-fast net and bandwidth should be made accessible to everybody in Italy, across the entire country. And I'd love also to reply to what Bassanini said earlier on. Our position in Eolo, we are more than happy of being part of a single network, but I believe that this project can only be brought forward if Team Open Fiber found the best solution to work together, to collaborate together in a profitable manner. And the second step, this will be made possible only if we're able to find an agreement with other operators that have learned, that have built alternative networks over the last few years to cater for an investment gap or perhaps the blind attitude of some governments years ago when so we have to bridge this gap in the digital divide. So unless we're able to do so and working effectively with all other operators, then we will not be able to make it. We actually want to allow these operators to be able to leverage everything they've done so far and speed up the rollout of this network. And because the objective is 100% coverage, the more we approach 100 as a number, the more we must have infrastructures to connect households in a simple way. We have to join efforts and work together for this common objective. And then back to what we're currently discussing around the table to submit to government, we're also considering training for human resources as well as security. The cybersecurity topic is extremely important, and I'd love to draw your attention to daily attacks which are happening through ransomware, where data is being encrypted, companies' data is being encrypted on servers as well as on backup. And employees' computers are being hacked to the point that the full operation is stopped. And then, of course, they are blackmailing companies to allow things to be restored. And now, on top of being very harmful to a single company, this can actually lead to a much bigger issue. And this is why I'd love to address all entrepreneurs so that they might really have some cybersecurity policies well established in the companies. And the piece of advice that we will submit is that we will have a task force, national task force, managed by the government, collecting all the reports and then providing support right away, even emergency scenarios, and of course at the same time delivering training, so that everybody can really be fully equipped with security systems for these attacks to be prevented. And this is what we're going to recommend.
And then back to Alessandro Talotta. Lisa. What about the role of operators? Because we're talking about the role of politics and associations and the institutions and the system as a whole. So, as part of all of that, what's the type of contribution that can come from operators? Thank you, Enrico. I believe that the role of operators, and I do believe in this, is still that of developing infrastructures and the best services. Apologies, I'm trying to adjust the screen. Anyway, All of the speakers have said very interesting things today, and I very much understand the appeal of an idea like that of neutral networks that have not been developed by service providers, but by third parties, independent third parties. Which is quite another story as compared to the ones that are the interface vis-à-vis the market. And the history of Fastweb shows this. I believe that the reality is fairly different because this model of neutral network can work very well for networks with a limited rate of innovation. I'm thinking, for example, of gas and electricity networks, where the technological component is limited. The internet works differently. The internet networks have a very high rate of innovation, and with the same infrastructure, you can do incredibly different things. The story of Fastweb shows this. We've always had end-to-end control of the network, and this has allowed us over time to be the first with 10, 20, 100, 200, 300 megabits, and then 1 giga, and we'll move on this way. So, back to what Marco Caimi said, I don't believe in state-imposed innovation. Innovation comes from the market. This has always been the case. If you remember 30 years ago, while in California, some guys in the garage were developing the Mac, in France, the state decided to be innovator and produced the Minitel. That was an ugly copy of computer. They tried for a while. It did 1/25th of what the market produced, and then they gave up. And France decided that Mac and PCs were better than their product. This is just an aside, an anecdote, a trivial anecdote as to that. However, I believe that the role of the state is to pave the way for innovation, a situation in which companies can compete. I believe that competition is always the driver. You know, if you're self-referential, you won't go that far. You have to be driven by competition. This doesn't mean, however, that we cannot generate synergies. And I believe that the best of both worlds is to have co-investment models such that operators can share, trenching and trellis. I mean, those are not the fundamental building blocks of innovation. And instead, they should continue to manage and control directly their own assets in the, intelligent components like fiber and technology, the heart, I mean, the antennas in the case of fixed wire access or mobile networks. That's where innovation moves on fast, but only if there are several networks competing, because if there's only one, we don't need to do better than we are currently doing. This is the view that we have, and whereby we believe that this is going to continue. Hopefully, this will continue to be the paradigm. This doesn't mean that we cannot do something in the areas where there's nothing. While I believe that where there are multiple competing networks already implemented, it would be pointless to put together what has already been done. Instead, in the areas where there's a lot to do, we should establish synergies. That's very important. We are trying to do that with FiberCop. It's an initiative with TIM, and it carries on a project that we started in 2016, and that, was so interesting because in a matter of 3 years, we've brought the fiber to the home, to 3 million households sharing the price of the expenditure. So we now have two networks rather than just one. So without any further ado, I'll stop here. Back to you, Enrico. Thank you, Lisa. Alessandro, Talotta, I'd like to come back to you. And since we are being hosted by Mix and we are celebrating the 20 years of Mix, so it's an important element. We don't have to forget this. Bassanini and others touched on one of the main innovation and change drivers of the internet, so cloud and edge computing. So we'll be seeing a greater innovation of these two elements in view of 5G as well. So what about the role of mix in this type of ecosystem where cloud and edge computing are increasingly important? So how could this change? And then if you want to step in on the many things that we've discussed, over to you, Alessandro Talotta. Yes, thank you. So first thing first, mix adds value every time it is present. What do I mean by that? I mean that we try not to see a platform located in a given place, in a specified city, in this case, Milan. All of the neutral data center operators and data centers in general welcome cloud providers and are happy to host them, and also cloud computing, so as to encourage as much as possible the development of services. What does Mix do when it installs machines inside data centers which are located in Italy? Well, it enables network interconnection so that all of the users connected to the networks can use those services. So we want to enable, facilitate, and add value. We simply contribute by using our portfolio. I mean, all of the networks and our customers who need to be interconnected. And the rest is being done by the other players in the market. So the value chain is very complex. However, it is well defined. I mean, we know who's best at selling services on the network and those who are best at offering excellent connectivity to connect several venues. I mean, let's say that we stand in between and the rest is being done by the other players of the value chain. Like Bassanini said, however, there's a greater spreading of data centers, not only centralized and big ones, but also in the periphery, because we need to cut latency, so the speed of use of the services to the benefit of citizens, quite obviously, and of those who use the service, like video call or a real-time application. I mean, anything that relates to the internet. So Mix will tend to be present wherever necessary, contributing our value, i.e. a portfolio of networks, thus facilitating interconnection, and we will be promoting in any case, and we will be present in any case wherever we can have neutral data centers, whereby it is meant that an international service provider is hosted by that data center and can choose to use several providers that can provide connectivity or other services, direct services. That's the point. And then back to the topics discussed today. Well, obviously, I've taken part in many debates on the network governance, and public and private partnerships. I think that we're headed, in the right direction. I very much agree with Guy, because there's a topic of transformation of Italian businesses. I'm very keen on this, and COVID has shown that this is the case. There's a lot of direct labor used in primary strategic sectors that should at least be studied, because we need to understand, Now that the physical reality is isolated, how can we ensure the operation of businesses with security and the operation of the sectors that underlie the Italian manufacturing system? And this has to do with the mechanization and robotization and transformation of organizations within enterprises. I mean, that's fundamental. As regards the infrastructure, I would love to have a single infrastructure. I cannot conceal that. And most especially, I'd like to have a passive single infrastructure, i.e. a fiber optic one that completely connects the whole of Italy, and then the services should be provided by businesses. And normally, they are digital. They don't use a passive infrastructure. But I think that this is complicated. I mean, it's complicated to put together the public interest, the private interest, and even the interest of financial investors who view return on investment in a completely different way. I mean, the public institutions quite obviously have to pursue the public interest, i.e. to encourage as much as possible and protect as much as possible citizens so that citizens and businesses have the same services. And the manufacturing world has to deal with planning, and finance focuses on the ROI. So it's dramatically different. So imagine a board of directors with these three players. It's dramatic, you know? No managing director, not even the best, can find a consensus among, these three players. Thank you, Bassanini, for agreeing with me, because it's so complicated. I don't want to be nasty, but it's true. So we have to change, the option, either one or the other. And from this point of view, I believe that if you're talking about the public good or the public interest, it should have its own avenue. However, I'm also in favor of competition. I very much like the work of players in the market. And it's working so well because, as compared to when we talked about the 2020 digital agenda, there's been an evolution. We need to speed it up. We need to raise money to be made available to the market because we need to transform our businesses. And aside from the full coverage of Italy with optic fibers for all, we need businesses to review the models. I've worked and I've invested in the 4.0 world, and I can tell you this much. It's just a small portion of what businesses can do and implement, because so long as we have agricultural equipment, we should have a network underlying it so that we can read data and the users of that equipment can efficiently work on a crop and read the related data. This is just a small chunk of the whole. So first of all, we have to protect what we failed to protect during the COVID emergency. I mean, many businesses have had huge problems. They've halted their production because their security systems were not adequate to forestall attacks coming from the IT world or otherwise. So we've planned on this. Technologically wise, it's simple, it's doable. So hopefully we will really curb bureaucracy. And like Bassanini said, in the public sector, it's impossible to try and manage public tenders and then be, equally fast when we have to invest locally. So thank you, Alessandro. Talotta. Sure, that's a point. I mean, the digitalization of businesses, and when they talk to the operators this way, they would be more competent, and the operators in turn need be more competent. So, the very last minutes with Carabetta and Bruno Bossio. I'll start from a question that is a clue for a broader discussion. Minister Pisano participated in the Gaia X summit, talking about an Italian hub to take part in the Standard Cloud in Europe project. But Vittorio Bertola, if I'm not wrong, said there's no idea of where the hub is and how the Italian industry and community can take part in it, including Italian businesses that are members of Gaia X. Wouldn't it be better if the government also engaged and involved the stakeholders prior to taking a stance? I mean, it's a broader discussion, I know, but there's a specific question on Gaia X. But as a matter of fact, this is a broader issue. Carabetta, your thoughts on this? Well, we've talked to the minister recently on this, and Gaia X is intended to provide guidance to private businesses, but governments are central, and likewise, the cloud system ought to be developed consistently with what is being done by Gaia X. So I believe that the public initiative and private initiatives should go hand in hand, because otherwise there would be tech mismatches. Having said that, associations have partnered since the beginning, and we'll see what's in store for us moving on. And the minister took part in this and made statements. In any case, we wanted to have more details on the parallel development of the national cloud system, which, in principle, will have its own pathway. I'd like to add a couple of things on what I've heard, because it's very interesting. I very much agree with Lisa on PPP, public-private partnerships. We've talked about that a lot. I believe that the state should innovate. We hear very often about this, and innovating states can give a direction to the market and incentivize the areas that need it most, and we should use the leverage. And like Marco Gai said, talking about a topic that is very dear to me, and I've worked on that. I mean, the National Innovation Fund. We talked about startups, and today we have a fund that was designed a couple of years ago. It's active. In January, there will be 8 to 9 funds available. It was included in the Restart Decree, 200 million, and now we are working on the budget law. This is a preview, by the way. Anyway, since the budget law is the budget law, we shouldn't give too much of a preview. Anyway, the topic is that we have to strengthen this on the wake of PPPs, because like Marco said, we should attract foreign funds, because never like now, we need to restart with a vision. And we need to be appealing, attractive in terms of best practices and capitals and skills from abroad. And in terms of innovation offering, we've done a lot, but there's a long way to go, because we need to fill the gap between us and the other similar European countries, and that gap is too wide. Going back to the beginning, I believe that federations like Gaia X can only help us on this front as well. I'm sorry that I read some articles talking about some sort of French-German initiative. No way, no way. It shouldn't be like that. Italy has all of the possibilities and assets to take part in that, and we as MPs are working alongside the government, and so this is a private initiative, and the role of businesses is going to be fundamental. We are working on this. The government should and will try and drive this transition with the right tools and instruments. Yes, I agree. This should not be a French-German initiative, this and others, but unless we are faster, the Germans and the French will take advantage and run fast. I'll make another example. Talking about high-performance computing, lots of European investments have been made to try and be independent from China and the USA. And in this case, we have to act as a single Europe, because if we want to compare ourselves to US and China in terms of high performance, this is what we have to do. We've received lots of money for pre-X-scale supercomputers, and X-scale computers will be made by the French and the Germans in some years' time. And this is very important, our manufacturing sector is so strong, we should be faster. I'd like to close with Vincenza, Bruno, Bossio, so that we can close with the lower chamber.
I have a question. I did say that we would have welcomed some questions, so perhaps we can move from, let's say, smaller items to broader items. Well, you must know that mix is used by a plethora of small and medium operators, and there's this ongoing debate between the small, medium-sized versus the large-sized operators. So the question is, why do we keep favoring those policies that do not stand out for large operators? And that is the question that I collected. So can we try through infrastructure such as mix to facilitate, to make it easier for small operators to work well? And because they still account for an important ecosystem, right? And far too often it is very much in favor of large operators. Bruno, Bossio, can you hear us? Thank you for the question. I must admit that I really stand out for the small operators, those investing such as Eolo does. The example of Eolo. Eolo is no longer perhaps that small, but there's a wealth of other small operators undergoing a number of problems. And last but not least, the vouchers issue. So this first portion of vouchers, which is now going through large operators first, most likely we will have to review this also in favor of smaller operators. I know that smaller ones are doing a great job, especially in the super wide areas, those where they really struggle, and they should be duly supported. And often myself and my colleagues, we do submit some potential amendments that may support successful initiatives in those terms. When it comes to the relationship public-private and the initiatives that Parliament can adopt in favor of companies, well, not only I fully agree with Spada and Galli when they said that there has to be a common commitment so that the tax credit for Industry 4.0 should now be shifted towards edge cloud computing as well as digital training, as there's still outstanding issues where we're lagging behind, especially in digital training, and not only the education, but also the ability for people to be able to learn on site, so that we might have those professionals out there on the market which are still missing all across the country, I have to say. Something else that perhaps we should tackle is the startup as well as open innovation topics. When it comes to true innovation, And what has been really innovative in smart work, remote work, which has now been perceived in a certain way, perhaps this perception should shift towards open innovation. So innovation is not just sitting inside within the company, but through innovative startup perhaps may translate into a different way of working. Of course, the pandemic has been traumatic, and of course, some business models have stemmed from that, and they will address remote work more and more. So this is why I believe that the role of myself as well as Mix and all internet exchange will become increasingly important. Thank you so much, and best wishes from my side. Thank you. Thank you all the attendees, people watching from home. A very interesting number, as I said at the very beginning. Thank you so much to our panelists. Well, of course, best wishes also from my side for the 25th anniversary. And thank you for making this morning event possible. And thank you for having organized and set up this beautiful studio. So let me just remind you what's coming up next. So you'll be able to see that either on the app you have downloaded, or you may also land on the reference page of Salotto for this celebration day. So the event will close 5 with a toast. There will be a quiz show and mix awards as from 4 p.m. And early afternoon, we will hear 2 keynotes. Thank you, and best wishes from my side once again. Enjoy lunch.